If you've ever played a Souls game, you probably know it for its rage-inducing difficulty and harsh but relatively fair combat. However, there's one particular Souls game that's a completely different story, Dark Souls 2. There are only two sides when it comes to it. People who accept the game for its shortcomings and enjoy it for what it is, or people who haven't even played it and call it the biggest piece of dog shit. Thanks Bernal, I'm sure your 2.5 hours of playing this game really gives you the authoritative decision to review 50 hours worth of content. Shitty Steam reviews aside, simply mentioning Dark Souls 2 is enough to start an argument. I mean, there are presidents arguing about it.
Bro. DS2 is a fucking garbage game and unironically the worst thing to ever come out of Japan.
DS2 is an unironic masterpiece with very minor flaws that ruined an otherwise great game. You shut your goddamn mouth.
Shut the fuck up, Sleepy Joe.
While many believe the general consensus is that playing this game will make you into a raging 32-year-old balding man,
Dark Souls 2 is a bad game. The world design is bad. The mob placement is bad. The fuck?!
there is still a lot to talk about concerning Dark Souls 2. In this video, I want to outline what exactly made Dark Souls 2 a tragic masterpiece, and go through a timeline of events to discover what makes this game so controversial, as well as analysing it from both sides. First of all, let's point out the fact that Dark Souls 2 wasn't made by the original creator of Dark Souls 1 and 3, Hidetaka Miyazaki. He was only overseeing Dark Souls 2. Miyazaki was actually busy working on Bloodborne at the time, although it's good to know that despite Dark Souls 2's controversies, at least something great came out of it. From development, Dark Souls 2 wasn't exactly going to be a traditional Souls game that everyone had hoped for. For the most part, people have come accustomed to having higher expectations for sequels. Sequels usually improve the original game on all fronts. Think of games like Borderlands 1 to Borderlands 2 or Halo Combat Evolved to Halo 2, although we don't talk about Kane and Lynch 2 because that game is just shit. Unfortunately, like Kane and Lynch 2, Dark Souls 2 wouldn't meet the expectations that it was set out to. Making improvements and one-upping Dark Souls 1 would prove to be a difficult task for FromSoft, especially without Miyazaki. From the start, it would seem like the developers wanted to make a completely different game to Dark Souls 1, which they certainly achieved. After some initial delays, the game was released on the 11th of March 2014. Now, the game was re-released as Scholar of the First Sin Edition a year later, but we'll get into that in a bit. A quick side note, I actually haven't played the original Dark Souls 2, so many of my biases are from Scholar of the First Sin Edition, but I don't think that will impact much of what I want to talk about concerning the core fundamentals of Dark Souls 2. Anyway, back on topic. When Dark Souls 2 was released, something that's not mentioned often is the fact that FromSoft decided to pull a Hackerman phone game. They had announced that they were downgrading the graphics. From a brief view, only the lighting and shadows seemed to be changed, but actually some of the textures and graphics were actually downgraded in some places, compared to what was originally shown off during the gameplay reveal. While it may not seem like a big deal, it just goes to show that this was just the start of issues when it came to Dark Souls 2. Though they did mention it was due to hardware limitations of the old gen consoles. And yes, this game is that old, but it doesn't excuse the fact that they showed the game off and then completely changed the look of the game, basically outright lying to people about how the game was going to look. While the graphics may not bother some people, it's still an important fact to mention. And it's pretty amazing how lighting can change the whole vibe of the game. I mean, the game went from dark and depressing to whatever this is. Some of the visuals were updated with the Scholar of the First Sin Edition, but the damage was done, and the whole vibe of the game had been completely changed. Besides the small controversy, the game was actually originally met with high praise from critics, and in classic IGN fashion, the game received a 9 out of 10. And for some reason, the IGN reviewer only mentioned that there's punishments for dying. Really? Harsh punishments for dying? I'm pretty sure he didn't even finish the game and still gave it a 9 out of 10. Although he did follow up with a review for the release of the Scholar of the First Sin, but he only noted that the game was more difficult for newer players. But still, then again, he didn't take into account any of the problems it has. I mean, a 9 out of 10, it must be a perfect game, right? Before I begin discussing Scholar of the First Sin, I want to clarify that everyone is entitled to their own opinion on both versions of the game. However, it is clear that the changes that were made in the Scholar of the First Sin Edition are disliked by the community. The game was re-released as Scholar of the First Sin Edition on April 1st, 2015. And I'm pretty sure FromSoft did this intentionally.
Hey, just was wondering, is this an out-of-season April Fool's joke?
No.
Updating Dark Souls 2 may seem like an obvious ploy to hop on the next-gen trend, which it most certainly is. The changes that were made were mostly unneeded, and added a lot more obstructions to the game. The good changes were that the game ran at 60 FPS 1080p for new consoles, and included all the DLCs. Personally, I found Scholar of the First Sin fun. However, the changes that were made somehow made the game a lot worse. They decided to change many of the core game mechanics, which ended up making the game completely different from the original Dark Souls 2. Now, the original game's level design still stays consistent in the remake, with its terrible inconsistencies. Although the game has many cool locations, it lacks the synchronicity of the other games in the trilogy. So for the Scholar of the First Sin edition, they decided to readjust the placement of the enemies in a less ganking manner, but in turn it led to more enemies being added into the game. Usually running through levels in most games often leads to death, which is good, right? You don't want the players to skip through levels without fighting anyone. But in the case of the Scholar edition, they added way too many enemies in hopes that players wouldn't take the cheesy approach of skipping past the enemies. In theory this may work, but as you probably already know, Dark Souls is extremely geared to 1v1 combat. Although there are many times putting multiple enemies against the player makes sense, it seems like the developers were adding enemies to the level just for the fun of it. In the case of Iron Keep, how exactly are you supposed to kill all these mini boss night enemies with the limited amount of Estus flasks you are given? Killing all these enemies and making it to the next bonfire is practically impossible. In reality, you'll be dying over and over again, until you'd probably trigger the enemy despawning mechanic, which occurs after the 12th time you've killed an enemy. They had to add this mechanic so that players wouldn't get stuck fighting the abhorrent amount of enemies in this game. Realistically, you'll need 1 Estus flask per enemy, just because of how strong they are. However, you're given 12 Estus flasks at max, which is the lowest amount in the Soul series, and the longest to drink, by the way. So you may ask what you're supposed to do in this situation. But wait, what's that? Miyazaki, is that you?
Hello, my child, I have come to give you infinite life gems for the rest of eternity.
Wow, Miyazaki, thank you so much for infinite life gems. Alright, life gems is a pretty cool mechanic if it wasn't for having an infinite amount of them. For some reason they decided to make a merchant at the start of the game sell life gems for 300 souls. So basically the strategy becomes to level up and then buy the life gems with the remaining amount of souls you have left. But you'll probably be spending your levels on adaptability. This stat goes down as one of the worst additions to any Souls game. This stat makes Barnyard combat on the Wii look good. So for some reason some developers thought it was a good idea for their dodge timing based game to have a stat that constantly changes the timing of your dodge. As you level up, your agility increases, and the invincibility frames increase, or iframes, meaning that the time when you are invincible during your rolls increases. Basically, the game starts you off with a 16th second of invincibility, and it goes up to over a half a second of invincibility. I don't really have to explain why this is so bad, but I'll do it anyway. There's only one invincibility timing in both Dark Souls 1 and 3, as well as Demon Souls, and 20 different slight variations in Dark Souls 2. Who thought tying a stat to dodge timing was a good idea? The Souls games are based on timing and learning to master it. Adaptability literally ruins everything that makes Dark Souls combat so good. You can't tell whether your adaptability is too low or the hitboxes are terrible. These sort of clips really make adaptability shine. I had about 108 agility in my playthrough, which equates to around about 1/3 of a second of iframes, but it still felt like the hitboxes were absolutely atrocious. Now despite all the negative things I've said about this game, some of the best Souls experiences were actually in this game's DLCs. The Crown of the Sunken King, Crown of the Old Iron King, and the Crown of Ivory King are all awesome and unique DLCs, with various different locations and definitely some of the most unique boss fights in the series. Although, to be honest, there are a lot of things that would hold me back about playing this game's DLCs again. They aren't the most polished DLCs, and the classic Dark Souls 2 game design really shows itself off in this one. Only about 4 out of the 9 bosses are actually good. With an invisible boss and a 5-minute boss run and the classic color a boss blue and make his hitboxes terrible. These DLCs are still extremely fun and shouldn't be left out when talking about Dark Souls 2 as a whole. While I don't realistically believe in a Dark Souls 2 remake ever being made, the idea of fixing many of the issues that plagued this game entices me. This game has so many cool and unique moments out of all the Souls games in the series, and it's just such a shame it got bundled with a barely adequate game. The potential this game had to be one of the best in the series was there, but it never really quite did live up to its potential. Whether or not Miyazaki deciding not to work on this game was a good or bad idea is really up to you, but the expectations and promises that this game made to its players was let down into becoming just a barely playable Souls experience. Scholar Edition or not, this game was a letdown to fans of the series, and with its pioneer hard at work on other games, Dark Souls 2 never really did see itself at its full potential. I would love to see a remake of this game that updates it to the level of combat in Elden Ring or Dark Souls 3, while also fixing many of the core mechanics, but it's unlikely to ever happen due to the community's distaste for this game. I think Dark Souls 1 being a cult classic really enticed From Software to remaster it in the first place, but Dark Souls 2 is broken beyond repair, and it's a sad reality that we won't ever see a Dark Souls 2 remake. This game has certainly changed my perspective of the Souls series. It has some of the lowest lows and the highest highs in the trilogy, but it still has that compelling nature that kept calling me back even after multiple instances of frustration. I kept coming back wanting to indulge myself in exploring the next location or fight the next boss, finally achieving victory on that boss that I spent so many tries trying to beat. And despite all the terrible things this game put me and many other players through, most players still enjoyed the experience. We beat the most unfair and difficult Dark Souls game, and we hated it. But for some reason there's this collective thought about how frustratingly bad this game is, and it strangely brings us together. We can collectively talk about the many times he spent trying to beat that one boss with a 5-minute boss run while also having the worst hitboxes in the game. It feels like a strange phenomenon of coming together to talk about how we triumphed through the most painful and infuriating game. It is the most hated game in the series, and it is very much the failure many Souls fans believe it is, but it stands its place as the most difficult and rewarding game in the series, and I don't think there will ever be a game like Dark Souls 2 ever again, and maybe for some people that's a good thing, but this is why I believe this game is a tragic masterpiece.